When the movie opens in 1991, the young Patricia is feeding a mouse that she had petted when she hears loud thumps from above. The woman screams, and soon after, blood starts to drip on her, making her very afraid. Then, the movie jumps forward 30 years to a time when Patricia has grown up. She calls her mother, who is then driving her daughter home, and she leaves the house too, seeing a mysterious figure known as the Badman. When she returns home, we discover that this is the same house that was shown feeding her father, Roloff, at the beginning of the film. When she goes there, though, an officer by the name of Hans is speaking to Roloff, and after he leaves, Roloff informs her that they are searching for a bagman who has ducks on deep holes in the bog, but Reek tells him that she saw the man on the way. Next, we see the bagman digging a pit in the dark, and while he hears a voice telling him to do so, the whispering stops abruptly, and when he turns back, he sees the shadow. And then his body is discovered in the same pit the next morning. We then witness a group of archaeologists headed by a man named Jonas, and one of his team members, Sonia, tells him that a woman's body was discovered 4 days ago and is in good condition. She also introduces him to a man named Leonard. Jonas then asks him about a man named Radu, and Sonia informs him that this morning police discovered a mandate who was excavating in his own pit. They claim he passed away from hypothermia. They are not permitted to examine the pit at this time. Then, after leading Jonah to the location where the woman's body is found, Beatrice wakes up with a start. She goes to her mother's room, where she notices that she is shivering in an odd way. Her mother tells her that everything is okay, but then Hannah arrives and tells Patrick that she had a bad dream. As Patrick is escorting her back to her room, she notices someone standing outside the house. She goes downstairs to investigate and tells her mother that she believes she has just seen someone. Roloff then arrives and asks if any of them have recently left. They believe it might be Bagman, but Rolf tells them it's not possible because the man passed away earlier that day. The following morning, Rolf got into an argument with Jonas because he thought someone from his archaeological team had trespassed on his property. Jonas apologizes to Rolf and tells him he will tell his men not to go to that side. Later, we see Betty and her mother at a clinic, where the doctor speculates that the patient may be experiencing unprocessed trauma that is causing physical symptoms. Ralph fixes a motion sensor camera outside the house, and informs Hannah that they will take a picture if they see any movement during the night. That evening, we see Jonas and Patrick enjoying a drink in a bar. The tree informs him that her mother has a nasty habit of picking up sugar packets. Suddenly, Jonas's health deteriorates, and he emerges to throw up. The two of them then begin to walk towards the house, where Patrick shares with him her family's history and how the people in the town believe that her entire lineage is cursed. Her daughter Hannah was born after her husband Neil passed away. Her grandmother was murdered when she was a little child, and her father later became an alcoholic and lost his job. And her mother stopped being emotionally available. Later that night, as Patrick is going to bed, she notices a man in the house, which makes her quite afraid. He apologizes to her and claims that he took some of her milk and Beatrix's, carries a knife, which she leaves there fright and brings him up to her mother. However, the man goes after her there and both them begin to flee upstairs out of terror, and the man expresses regret to them and claims that he is being forced to do it abruptly by them, takes a less sled, knocking her down, then attempts to murder her, but Patrick retaliates, forcing the knife out of his fingers. However, he soon begins to scream loudly. Hannah then appears, and Patrick leads her to her room. Velis orders the man to leave, but he tries to kill her again. Roloff arrives just in time to hit him in the head, rendering him unconscious. The police then show up at the house and take him to the hospital. The following day, Jonas visits them and apologizes, saying that he had known Radio for a long time and that he was a very nice man who was a member of his team. He doesn't know why he did this, so Patrick asks him if he was 40 or 45 years old when in 1991. Jonah replies in the affirmative, stating that he was 10 or 15 years old and that he had lived in Romania. When Patrick leads him to her room, Alice begins to cry. Jonas tries to comfort her. Roloff informs Alice that everything is happening again, that they need to leave right away, and that she is going to the kitchen to get tea. But Alice faints. We then see Alice in the hospital, where her brain is being scanned. When Patrick leaves the hospital with Alice, she recognizes Leonard there. She enters the hospital again to follow Leonard and discovers that Jonas is there as well. They had come to see Ridu, and that Radu's family is also present, and his son begins to stare at her. She finds this odd, so she starts to leave. We can see that Ridu's son is following her. He enters the elevator with her and says, "No more it," before extending his hand. As soon as Patrick holds it, the elevator stops, and the boy begins chanting. When he opens his eyes, he becomes afraid, seeing someone behind the tree. Suddenly, the tree exceeds in the mirror, indicating that a terrifying spirit is standing behind her. This greatly frightens her. She returns outside to her mother and discovers that no more means she never died. She then sees Jonas and walks over to him. When she asked if he knew why Ridu had dug, he replied that he hadn't woken up yet, but that at camp they had heard that he was digging away from the site. The following day, they met again at the bar, where Matrik introduces him to an elderly man whose son Misha had passed away a few days earlier and who had also been digging like the others. Jonas now discloses that they have discovered the remains of 100-year-old ladies at their location. Patrick then introduces him to Ton, who claims that Misha knew precisely where to dip. He mentions a woman by the name of Helen. And with Folk Orgo being connected in some way to his son's demise, his father, who was also persuaded of the whispering and served as Misha's spiritual advisor, was terrified to mention this when they discovered Misha's body. He then becomes distraught and asks Patrick to give him a call. Later, when Jonas asks Patrick about Helen, Patrick responds that she is sort of the bad guy in this whole mythology, as if there is an evil force in the bog whispering terrible things to anyone who hears. She believes it is all just a story, but some people find it extremely terrifying. At this point, Patrick becomes emotional and tells Patrick to call him if she has any questions. Later on, when Jonas asks Patrick about Helen, he responds that she is sort of the bad guy in this whole fake legend, as if there's an evil force in the bog whispering horrible things to anyone who hears. She believes it's just a story, but some people take it very seriously. Her dad claimed to have heard it once, and she believes she heard it too in the hospital, but Jonas dismisses it. Next, she asks Patrick about the woman, to which he says he won't tell her if it makes her feel uncomfortable or paranoid. After that, she asks him to stop the car and gets down from it and starts leaving. Jonas follows her to try to stop her, but she starts laughing and kisses him, which is when they start becoming passionate. When Jonas returns to the camp later, Sonia shows him the cut on the woman's throat. He also learns that Radio had dogs in certain areas and discovered the bodies of 4 more women, all of whom had the startling feature of having their throats slit vertically. After this, we see the camera taking pictures that Ralof had placed outside his house. While drinking water in the kitchen, Betrick notices an odd shadow outside the house. After cleaning the mirror to make it clear, she finds her mother's reflection in the shadow outside the house. The next day, Rolf shows him the photo that was taken the previous night, but he doesn't see anything in it. He tells him that he is worried about the attack, to which Rolf replies that it wasn't his fault and that he was just listening. Hans asks him what's going on, and he says that he wants something from him. Next, we see Betrick at the school, where Hinna's school play is about to start. Meanwhile, Sonia tells Jonas about the legend of Fake He. Many centuries ago, there lived an evil lord named Walter and his resentful wife Helen. They treated their people badly and lived in immense wealth while leaving others to struggle together. They commanded a household with dozens of servants, one of whom was a young girl named Fakey. At this point in Hannah's play, her grandfather was not present. Sonia goes on to say that it was some time before Walter began to develop lustful feelings for the girl, and eventually Fakey became pregnant. When Helen learned that this was the case, she became enraged and claimed that it was not him but rather that Fakey had cast a spell on him. As a result, she was labeled a witch, condemned to await her fate in the dungeon. She prayed to a god for assistance, but it was a different god, the pagan god Moloch, the god of child sacrifice, who answered her prayers. A pact was then formed and sealed with the mark of a mohawk burned into the girl's forehead. Moloch whispered to her that he would help her escape a prison, but beware that this revenge would become a jail of its own and he would claim her progeny, even those yet unborn. At the stake, Helen insisted that Fakey acknowledge her sin and make amends. When Fakey said no, she released her hand. Before anyone could intervene, she killed herself. As Fakey's last breath left her body, her miserable soul was taken from hers. From that point on, as the Lord's wife, she used her power over his decisions, and happiness and prosperity returned. To this day, Fakey is revered as a true hero and a beacon of light. People believe that ever since, her spirit has been roaming the bog, consumed with rage and vengeance, whispering her evil eyes into the ears of onlookers. Meanwhile, Beatrice discovers a drawing of Hannah there, where she had created the same spirit she had seen in the elevator following the play. Beatrice meets Hannah and asks her about the drawing, to which she replies that she made it up now. On the way home, Patrick is thinking about it when she sees Roloff putting some traps around the house to prevent bad things from happening. Upon arriving home, Patrick receives a call from Jonas. When Jonas asks her to meet him at the fixed party, we see Betty with Ton. She is informed that fish communicate with each other through micro-vibrations, and that is how it worked with Mishai, and that some people are more sensitive to those vibrations than others. He then leads her to a room and has her close her eyes while he taps on a book. Slowly, the sound of the tap becomes louder and slower, and she is transported back in time to her early years. On that day, her grandmother was murdered, and she witnesses her grandmother's throat being cut vertically. She awakens abruptly and discovers that all the fish she bred are dead. She then rushes to the camp to meet Jonas, but he is not there. Sonia approaches her and informs her that she is not permitted to be here. On the other hand, we see Leonard walking in the bog, who could hear the whispers and was heading towards Patrick's house when Rolf uses a taser gun to knock him unconscious and begins tying his hands. It is then that he hears the sound of tinkling and whispering. Patrick asks if the women are all related. She responds that yes. Patrick is packing, and when a smaller one arrives. When Matrique informs her that they are leaving, she claims that many women have been found dead with their throats cut and that they were all sacrificed because someone wants to harm their family. Meanwhile, Olaf hears tingling from all directions and then sees someone passing behind him. A few women approach him, and he notices that one of them is a less common woman. He then hears whispers and enters a transgender state. Meanwhile, Jonas is at the party and calls Patrick, but he is unable to get through to him. Just then, Sonia calls him and informs him that Patrick has arrived at the camp, and she was very scared. When Jonas informs Sonia that her grandma and husband have both been killed, she is shocked and asks him if he believes that sacrifices are still being made. Patrick rambles on about how her family is in danger, so she believes that people are still being sacrificed to Moloch. When Jonas sees this, he leaves the scene right away. On the other hand, we see the spirits of all the women standing outside the house and Roloff making his way towards it. See Roloff standing at the door of the house, trying to open it. Next, he attempts to enter the door by smashing the glass, but Patrick manages to extract the key. She retreats, and Patrick locks Hannah in a room while Alaska locks the other doors of the house. However, Roloff breaks through the door and attacks Alaska, trying to strangle her, but Patrick knocks him out by hitting him on the head. Later, she notices that her mother has vanished from the room, and Roloff also awakens. He goes upstairs, where he finds Patrick unconscious in front of him, and he proceeds to the upstairs where he finds her mother has vanished. At this point, we witness her possession. Jonas is approaching their residence, but his leg gets caught in a trap. Then, we see some people entering the house, one of them walking lame and wearing a mask similar to Moloch's. Patrick was tied to the bed, and when she regains consciousness, she notices that Alaska and all of those people are standing in front of her, mesmerizing her. Melissa assures her that it won't take long, and she picks up the blade and slits her throat. Seeing that, Patrick becomes extremely scared and begins to cry. Just then, the same terrible spirit that she saw in the elevator appears, and she begins to move towards her. When Jonas gets to the house, he fastens the ropes that tie Patrick, which causes her to tremble. A few days later, Jonas returns to the town and meets Patrick. He offers her and Hannah a place to live, but Patrick politely declines, leaving Patrick to pick up a sachet of sugar from the cafe, which is proof that the fake now lives in her. Next, we see Brett and Hannah at home. As they look out the window, they see the spirit of Bertrix along with numerous other spirits. This is where the movie ends. Please like and subscribe to my channel and click the bell icon never to miss new video updates. Thanks for watching.